I hope this episode finds you doing well. Roberta MacGillivray is fascinating. It is fun to hear her story. You're going to enjoy it. I'll keep this intro short here today. This is an episode about succession planning and doing it extremely well. So much of the time we focus on mistakes and learning from those mistakes, and that is super important. This is going to be a different picture. This is going to be an episode where Roberta shares a lot of just tons of success with what she's found in business, in succession planning, her taking over from her dad. And I think that there will be a few aspects that you can pull out. I'll cover this in the outro, but pay attention to, I would say, two things. One is, again, just how intentional this family was about succession planning. And number two, at the end, Roberta really goes into leaders and finding the right leaders and in investing in these people so that she can have this group around her, building this community around her where people can challenge each other and the business can do well because of it. Enjoy the episode. Hello, Roberta. It's really good to see you in person here for the first time, but also interview you and get some insight. It's so much fun getting insight from people who have been in business for a while. And maybe that's where I'll start with you. Your dad started the business. You are a second generation owner, CEO of this business. So maybe back up a little bit and share, where does BGE come from? Tell us about the company, maybe some of the history and your dad's background as well.
Sure. Well, first of all, Mark, thanks for having me today. This is, I think, maybe my first podcast ever. So this is exciting. Yeah, to give you the origin story, my dad, Daryl Sutton, was a competitive curler, and he was working in retail, and he needed to be on the competitive curling circuit. So he needed to find a job that was Monday to Friday. And so he applied to a company called B. Guthrie Engineering, so that's BGE. And he thought he was applying for a warehouse job. And when they offered him the job, they asked him if he had a suit. And he said, wow, this is probably the fanciest warehouse job ever. I'm going to wear a suit. But what they had in store for him was a sales role. And so B. Guthrie Engineering at that time was selling HVAC equipment and cooling towers. And they believed there was a opportunity in replacement filter business to go into those HVAC systems that were being sold. And so along with B. Guthrie Engineering as well as their suppliers, they taught my dad all he needed to know about air filtration. And his first gig was working in at the University of Alberta campus. He went around and he surveyed every piece of equipment and put together a program for preventative maintenance on the filtration side, frequencies, and also they said, well, how are we going to get all these filters changed? He also pitched them a service contract. So that kind of started his world. He knew nothing about air filtration, but by the time he retired, we'd say he's probably one of the godfathers in the industry of knowing how important, not just filtration, but how important clean air is. And so he started with B. Guthrie, worked with them for a few years. The engineering firm said, hey, we like engineering more than air filtration. Daryl, you've built a successful little division here. If you can muster up some money to buy this division from us. So he mustered up some money. I think my parents, that was the first remortgage of their home. And they also had a few other partners that were active in the business, and they spun it off to be BGE Service and Supply. And today we call it BGE Indoor Air Quality Solutions. So that was how they started. That was in the late 60s. They were in Alberta and Saskatchewan. And as the Western Canada, market was growing, there was more opportunity for them. So they went around and just as all the construction that was happening and the boom that was happening in Alberta and Saskatchewan, they just kept on pursuing that, not just universities, industrial sites, hospitals, commercial buildings, schools, anywhere you need clean air for people, processes, equipment. And then their supplier was going direct in British Columbia and Manitoba. This was in the 90s. And they saw how such a good job my dad and our team was doing. They offered my dad the opportunity to buy the inventory and take on those warehouses. And so in the 90s, we went from Alberta and Saskatchewan, we grew to British Columbia and Manitoba. My dad also found a small manufacturer in Edmonton area that was making some specialty product that was difficult to get from our Eastern Canadian or US suppliers. And so he added manufacturing, he added some more technical services. And so the 90s was probably a doubling of the business at that time and really growing forward. Yeah, so that was kind of I guess the initial part. I'll stop there. If you want me to keep going, I can, or we can talk about other things.
No, that's good. So was it the 90s where BGE experienced the greatest growth?
I would say if we think about percentage wise, number of people, number of inventory, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's continued to grow, and it's moving through some really good growing pains, but also opportunities right now. But that I would say was the impetus that built the foundation for us to be able to be where we are today.
Okay, so we've talked about this a little bit before in a phone call. And the question that I wanted to ask you up front was, what was it like sitting around the kitchen table with a dad that's a business owner, and you who would eventually become the business owner, just sitting there soaking it in? What were the conversations like? What did you talk about? What was it like in general?
Sitting around the dinner table with my dad was exciting. He could make any story exciting, anything from just even going to the grocery store. There was an adventure to be had. So I think my dad did a really good job of finding the interesting story, whether it was with a customer, with a new employee he might have interviewed, just something new that had happened at work or that he had learned. The conversation about business was probably front and center. Maybe sometimes more than we wanted it to be. But whatever that was, it really rubbed off on me, because if you go back and look at my school books and, the teacher asking, what do you want to do when you grow up? I wanted to run this business. That was, if we go back and look, there was maybe a couple years I wanted to be a teacher, but most of the time I was talking about being in the business. I think the other thing, it wasn't just around the dinner table. Any opportunity that we had where we had a PD day at school or summer vacation, my dad always had things for us to do, or my mom was curling on the weekend and my dad had to take care of us. We were going to the office and he had things for us to do. And he always made them fun, educational, but also teaching about responsibility and making sure that, hey, you signed up to do this job, you need to complete this job.
It's so funny. I think about this all the time with my kids and how I'm trying to instill certain things in them, whether they own the business afterwards or not. That's not, I guess, as important to me. How much do you think of that was just who your dad is, and how much of it was being really intentional about preparing you to take over, preparing family to take over?
Yeah, I think in my dad's heart, he always had this dream that this was going to pass on to the second generation. I think he always hoped that one day one of his or both of his children would be running this business. And so I think that was, for my dad, like family, blood family, that was number one. And how do we do that? And then I think my dad didn't have a formal post-secondary education, and so he did everything he could. One of the values at our organization, which is shaped around my dad, is be the expert. So whether or not you have a post-secondary degree, like learn as much as you can about your interests, about your craft, about the industry that you're in, and continue to do that. And so I think as this business either gave him, some people say, hey, launching a business was the best MBA money I ever spent. I think he was really cognizant about that. And I think he jumped into a lot of like leadership books and business development books and that sort of thing. And I think as he started to learn those things, he probably thought to himself, man, I wish I had these learnings when I was a kid. He was a farm boy. He learned a lot of things from his grandfather and his father and his mother, whether it was hard work, or whether it was how you treat people. But then as he layered that together, he was a salesperson by heart. And so I think it was about, how do you keep building, shaping your character? And I think when he saw those things, and how well they benefited him and benefited the business, I think he really was intentional around that, with my sister and I.
I was recently speaking with another business owner out of Winnipeg, and he talked about T-shaped leadership. He talked about how this horizontal, having a broad spectrum, having these soft skills, all these soft skills that you talk about your dad knowing, how that's so important, and then drill down, be the expert is kind of what you're talking about with what your dad was teaching, and drill down and make sure that you really know your stuff in the area that matters to you most right now. Okay, let's transition to you a little bit, Roberta. When, again, you're thinking about business all the time, you're growing up going, yeah, I want to take over this business. When did that start becoming more of a reality of intentionally going, what are the skills that I'm learning? How am I really preparing to take over this business?
Well, I'll just go back to being a high school student. And I remember one of the conversations around the table, and it kind of goes back to traits, is my dad came home with this profile assessment. And he had my sister and I fill out this profile assessment, and then he went away and was a little bit more, it had a few more steps to it way back then. But he came back with the results, and he sat down and he talked to us about those results. And so really built a lot of self-awareness. But it also showed, I think for me, where I had some natural tendencies that would probably suit well for leading an organization. I think also I found myself in the different things that I was involved with. I'll go back to shout out to Girl Guides, but I was a Pathfinder, and I found myself getting tapped on the shoulder for being the leader, even though I wasn't asking to be that. And so I think I started thinking about that. I loved the idea of business. I was even starting to read business books rather than fiction books. And so I think by the time I was done high school, I knew that I wanted to go into business. I had talked about I would have loved to run my dad's business one day. I had lots of part-time opportunity at the business to work in different areas. So that was happening. But I don't think when I actually went into university that I said, well, when I get out of university, I'm going to run my dad's business. I'd say that's where it got a little bit more maybe gray. I knew I wanted to be in business and maybe an entrepreneur, but I think you're kind of thinking about being younger, and you're looking at all these different avenues, and you're looking at all these big corporations and all the different avenues. So I think all of a sudden my mind opened up to, well, where can you add value as a young person, and how can you gain experience? So when I went to the University of Alberta, I went into the co-op program. Every year my dad tried to get me to do a co-op job with him, and I said, Dad, I can get that from you, thank you, but I want to go and get experience elsewhere. So I had experience working with the federal government. I had experience actually working at the University of Alberta, and then I had experience working with a small software development company. And I had really, this is like late 1990s, early 2000s. And so I got the information technology software development bug, and all of a sudden I went on this totally different trajectory. My third co-op job turned into a full-time job. I started in technical support, product development, ended up being their IT manager, and it was incredibly exciting. It was a family business, so I think there were some parallels that I understood those parts of it. But it was going through incredible growth and like startup that my dad had a very well-established business, and even kind of inherited some of that establishment even when he started that business. So I started doing that. But then in 2000, IT wasn't doing that well. Like there was a bubble that business had to shrink, and I don't think it needed my skills anymore. I went into management consulting and IT consulting, but kind of felt like these big Edmonton organizations, what are they going to learn from me being 24 years old? And so then my dad reached out to me and he said, hey, we've gone through tremendous growth. I don't have an HR department. I don't have a marketing department. We're just kind of doing this whenever we need it. Can you come in and help me formalize at first HR and safety. And so I said, sure, I'll go back and take all the courses that I didn't take for HR and those sorts of things while through the faculty extension. And as we take those, we'll start to implement performance review process and compensation review and a health and safety program and all those sorts of things. So as I was helping the business formalize the back office, my dad was able to lean more into driving kind of the front office of sales and so forth. And yeah, and so that was incredibly exciting. I was working with my dad, but also he was coming to me in terms of, hey, I wasn't just the part-time student. It was, hey, like, some things I don't know, and how can you help us with those things? And so that was really cool because I got to come in kind of in a startup way of creating a department, but I had the luxury of a really well-established business that have good values, good purpose, good customers, that we continue to, use the laurels and the values that we set up way back when. We just get to lean into those even more, and we get to keep refining kind of how we operate as a business. So that's kind of my path of where I went to, and I guess the luxury of being an HR manager is you come in at a spot where you kind of start to learn really quickly everything that's happening in the business because you're trying to find the right resources that can help leverage where we're going, but you're also dealing with, where those challenges are. And, we are we have a large base of employees. And so it's our employees that make sure we achieve our success at the end of the day. So really making sure that we're creating a culture and having the right people on the bus, so to speak.
Something I really like about what you're saying is that your dad didn't create a position for you of saying like, hey, how can I take care of my daughter here? You were going a completely different direction, probably quite happy with it. And he said, I need you. I need you. Come and help. And something I like about that, Roberta, is that for you, it would have built a unique type of confidence for you rather than saying how like, yeah, this is just nepotism at its finest. I'm needed here. And through what I'm bringing in through systems and HR and everything else that I'm doing, I'm bringing so much value here that I know that. And that probably gave you a different type of validation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was really good. We did a lot of succession planning later on in the business. And I think one of the things that we hadn't really intentionally thought about, but I think and my sister was working in the business at the time too, and she came right out of high school. And I think it was the first time the organization had seen a second generation come into the business. I think, unfortunately, at that time, even though my sister was hardworking, did all the right things, tried to do her best, those sorts of things, I do think of, I had two advantages. I had an advantage that I had worked in other organizations that was bringing some skill set to BGE that wasn't already there before. But I also think I had the benefit that, unfortunately, my sister had to step through some of those hard hoops, and the organization probably decided maybe we shouldn't do that again with this next person. I would say sometimes if you come into a role at BGE that's already been established, one of the things is they're comparing you to the person that was there before. I wouldn't say BGE is unique in that happens in many different organizations. So I think I had those two benefits, that my sister had probably paved some way for me, that people said, you know what, maybe we do this differently the second time. Let's take those learnings from that.
Which then set you up for success in various ways, which makes sense to me. Okay, so with succession planning, in that process, it was a long process, right? Your early 2000s, you're starting in the business. 2015, I think, is when you took over. So in that process, what were the most helpful tips, tricks, cheats to get to where you are now and have that successful succession?
So yeah, like when I started in the business, again, as a kid, I always thought I wanted to run the business one day. But if you met my dad when I came into the business, my dad was full on. He was, if you think about a charismatic entrepreneur that rolled up to start the business, he was still that guy that if there's an issue with a customer, he's getting in his car at 10 p.m. so he can be there at 8 a.m. to help those salespeople with that conversation or that discussion. Or he's, driving across, I believe it was like 9/11. He was driving across the country because there were no flights and he had to put on a training session in Winnipeg and goes, that's okay, I'll still make it. I'm just going to drive. I might have to start in the afternoon. So my dad's energy level and his command of the business was very well like he was the leader. Um, it wasn't until I did have two children while I was in that role. And I did find myself, even though I was helping set up the back office, I found myself in a lot of the strategy meetings. I was helping lead now our sales planning, our sales processes, our strategic planning, those sorts of things. So I found myself more and more in those strategic discussions. And just before, or just as I was on maternity leave with my second, I went to my dad and I said, Dad, like, I really see the path forward. My husband had his own business, I had mine, and we said, you know what, we can't do both of these going forward. We're going to have to decide on one. And we really, we're passionate about BGE and its sustainability going forward. And so I said to my dad, I said, one day I'd like to own this business and I'd like to be president of this business. And it was kind of like I wanted both. I didn't want to just be president. I had heard of, if you have a leader like my dad, um, it's hard to give up the reins if you don't kind of give up all of it. So my dad said, this is like one of my proudest days. I'm going to go away on vacation. I'll be back and we'll talk about this. And so when he returned from there, um, we actually engaged. We've had tremendous advisors. My dad has always had really great advisors. And so we've always been able to pick up the phone and say, we're thinking about this. And at that time, KPMG had a succession planning division. And so we went through a succession planning process. We set up just kind of like, I believe it's ABFI or CAFE or some of the Alberta or some of the business family planning. He engaged us with them. We got involved in roadmap, and it was the whole family. So I think you hear about the Venn diagram of the family, the business, and ownership. We learned all about that. Everybody, like my mom, my sister, my brother-in-law, my husband, all six of us were in those planning, and we set up a succession plan. So there was kind of like, how do we get all the family thinking about what this is, but then what is required for Daryl to feel comfortable that Roberta can take on the reins, and how is that going to work? And I would say there were lots of starts and stops. My dad did start to have some health issues, so at times we had to pause things as he was recovering from some of those health issues. And like the business needs things, the family needs things. So it did take probably way much longer than I wanted it to. But if I do go back and think now, man, I had a succession plan probably since I was, junior high, of my dad spending this time with me and my sister and talking about the importance of the business. And I mean, how many times do you get that opportunity to be side by side with someone through those things? I would say during that time, one of the key things was, because we knew what the end in mind looked like, that one day I would own it. Man, those tough days at work when nobody understands it except for that person that's in all three of those circles. My dad and I battled on a lot of things and challenged each other, and but man, when the business was tested behind closed doors, we were the only ones that got it, and it was yeah, I miss those days.
It's so what strikes me about this is kind of two sides. One is how intentional your family went at this, how intentional you were. Again, it took maybe a little bit longer than you initially wanted, but your family was intentional in setting this up. This wasn't your dad passes away one day and, oh, who's going to fill the position, which does happen, right? Or, hey, I don't know what to do, I'm starting to have health problems. I've got somebody who I knew back in Calgary that was a phenomenal business leader, just absolutely brilliant. And things have fallen apart, handing it over to the kids, not because the kids are good or bad. Like it has nothing to do with their probably their capability in some ways, but they weren't intentional about it. That's what strikes me, the first thing. The second thing that strikes me is how much you've appreciated, I'll call it collaboration, I'll call it aggressive collaboration, where it's people go at each other a bit, you and your dad, in order to achieve the best result, not against each other, not with any ill intention, but battle each other a little bit to make sure that you're doing things well. Maybe talk about that a little bit, because you said you miss it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I probably have those battles now with my husband in the business too. So, I mean, I guess while I miss my dad in terms of that, I still get those good battles. I think the other thing was, that was how the business operated if you sat around the leadership team at that time. So the other gift I had was my dad's leadership team saw me grow up in the business. And so as I came into the business, I got their support too over the time of, showing up, doing the work, working together, collaborating, those sorts of things. But when we were in management team meetings, if you walked into those, you kind of say, this team does not get along at all, because, everyone would be having, like you kind of say, like having the tough conversations so that we get the best outcome. And so I always felt like we would battle internally as we're trying to figure out where we want to go for the future. But as soon as that got tested, whether it was a competitor or something went wrong with a customer or something with a supplier, or even like macroeconomic situations, all of a sudden we were so aligned and we knew how to go to battle for that. So it was almost like, and I don't know what psychology, model that talks to, but that was kind of how that was developed in the business. And I would say, I think you gravitate towards people that kind of think that similar way because you want that same interaction. So going forward, I would say, as that team has retired, there's still one who was actually one of the original business owners, who is still an advisor to us today, and I still get to bend his ear, and he still does training sessions and different research for us. So he's an incredible mentor and advisor for us. He still will tell me what I need to hear. Sometimes when he goes, I see where you guys are going and I think you're close, but don't forget about this, this, and this. And I would say the other thing is we're building our leadership team right now to be able to have those same conversations. We need to be able to rumble, like Brene Brown says, so that we get the best outcome going forward. And I think, at the base of it, we respect each other. We appreciate that, and respect the fact that they have the knowledge and skills and experience to do those things. But we also just need to keep working forward to make sure we're always as sharp as we can be, and we're thinking about all of the pieces. And I would say we have an incredibly experienced team. From their own experiences, they're still very new in the BGE business, that they haven't gone through a couple cycles where I had the luxury of, I could go and talk to some of our senior business development people, and they had been through three different economic cycles, that you could kind of go, yep, this is what happens, this is what happens, this is what looks differently. We don't necessarily have that right now in every single spot, and we're building that.
It's so much fun to hear you talk about culture, because, and you didn't use that word, but so much of this podcast has been about culture because it's such an integral part of higher performing organizations. It's a fact. And the culture that I'm hearing from you, people talk about a family culture. And I think that the average person goes, oh, it's warm and lovey-dovey and you cook food for each other. And what you're saying is no, that the family culture that we've built is that you can challenge each other, trusting that it's not going to be something that you hate each other for afterwards. Relationship is not going to fall apart. You don't have to worry about it. We have this goal to create a higher performing organization for ourselves, and we will work to that goal and battle each other. And at the end of the day, then facing others, you can defend each other as well far better. I think it's a bad analogy, but I think about my kids and how they will go at each other, but if anyone goes after either one of them, they've got each other's back. And I go, that's the beauty of the right culture is that it's actually doing something. It's not stagnant. It doesn't simply feel good. It feels good when you achieve things together because you battled through it, and because sometimes you had to maybe take a step back and say, okay, I'm going to put pride at the door here and do what's best. And when people are working together like that, it's brilliant. You've talked about now building new culture. So maybe go to what has worked best for you. What are best practices? What have you learned in hiring the right leaders and in really replacing that old guard that worked so well together and in creating a new group that works well together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about culture, because I think there's great things about our culture, and then there's things that we've had to kind of, maybe that served us well before, but it's not serving us as well anymore. And sometimes for those who have been with the organization for a very long time, they're like, wait a second, but this is what success looked like before, and now you're saying that's not as important. So yeah, I think if I go back to what's worked well for our culture, we worked, my dad was able to walk in a room, and the way he talked and the tone he had and how he treated people, you could just kind of see, well, that's the culture. And so when we did the succession planning and my dad was stepping away from the business, that left a big void of this person there kind of reminding everybody all the time, just because they were there. And so we worked with an organization to help us really articulate our purpose and really articulate our values. And so those values, and I said one earlier, be the experts, striving for excellence. So never getting used to status quo, keep improving, keep testing things, keep improving. And together we're better, meaning, hey, this wasn't just Daryl. It wasn't just, a certain person that won the day. Anything we have done at BGE is because, together we're better. And, we really work hard on making sure it's the BGE brand. It's not Roberta, it's not Daryl, it's not, so-and-so that does that. So those are the things that we brought from where my dad started, and we've probably, coined them better and have put a better, it's better to be able to explain that. And we don't have to always go back to the old stories. We have a program that actually gives a shout out every time we see someone living those values. We nominate them, their manager knows about it, they get to know about it, and we keep, rewarding that. I would also say we interview on those values. So if we don't see those values showing up on interviews, they don't get chosen. We also manage to those values. So if we see someone's in the organization and they're not living to those values, that also goes into play. And if someone's looking to be promoted, again, I guess it's another form of interviewing, but we look to those. You talk about the family business, and that has been a little bit trickier in terms of that, because I think you've talked about some of those stereotypes about family business. Well, they're family, so we should do this. And I would say we have had family members in the business, and we still do today. And we really do try and say, you know what, we are family, and we have this cord for that, but we are here to do a certain job. Even with my role, I'm no longer CEO. My husband has actually stepped into the role in the last couple of years. I am the executive director. I am helping on some strategic projects. I still take on some of maybe what you'd call co-CEO of some certain things that are, table stakes that need to be done in the business, but maybe are not key for how we're driving the future forward. Ian's got more of the growth portfolio and where we want to go grow as a clean air company. And so that just shows that, you know what, just because I'm the family member, doesn't mean that I'm going to hold the reins for the entire time that I'm here. I'm going to show that we need to make sure we put the right people into the right spots and then help support them to succeed. There's been some changes in terms of those family pieces. What I would say, and my dad said this from the very beginning, is, hey, this is a family business. And at the time that he told us this, but there's 100 other families that we're supporting. I think that's the part of family business that we think of, that we are not just a publicly traded quarter, only as good as our last quarter results. We care about the people that work for us. We care about the families that they are providing for. But at the end of the day, we also have to make sure, and this was something Dwayne Fliss reminded us of at Traits, is we can't put the needs of one person in front of the needs of the organization. And so as well as we want to be as compassionate and empathetic, and we want people to succeed, whether they're with us or whether we need to part ways and they're moving on to a different area, we still want to wish the best for them. And I always say, I want to be able to walk down the street, and if I ran into someone that maybe we didn't see eye to eye and we're no longer in the business together, that I can still say, how are you doing? How's your family? I hope you're doing well.
That makes so much sense to me. And you've touched on, I'm going to ask the question a little bit a different way. You've touched on some aspects of it. What about specifically hiring leaders has worked best for you? What are the some of the highest points of learning that you've obtained in this process?
So I'll touch on two really big success stories that we've just had, and I think it's probably like we've done this wrong many ways before, and we maybe finally got it right. So going back to the Traits tool, because we've worked with Concord for so long, and because they know our organization, and we've been able to set up the job profiles of what's success, and they understand our culture, and they understand us as leaders. We actually approached them as we were bringing some people into the organization that we actually didn't have that job in the organization at that time. So we were formalizing our supply chain was one, and also augmenting how we deliver services. We are scaling our service business by adding new offerings and scaling across Canada. So we need something different than what we've had inside our organization. So we put the job description together. We talked about what the needs are, but right away we figured out what was the ideal personality profile of those. And so we led with that. So we worked with Mike Moreau, and he went out to the market, and we led with that, because one of the things we found in the past is, hey, we're likable people. We like people. Sometimes we end up really liking the person that comes into the organization. And maybe that's the part of the family business part too, is we hire really likable people. But then at the end of the day, and I talked to Dennis Blonde or Mike Moreau, and I'd look at the dots, and he's like, well, it's probably 60% of the way there. It's 80% of the way there. And I'm like, yeah, but I really like them. So we're going to hire them. And then we realize that those things that were maybe not all there are the things that are really preventing that person from being successful into the role. And so you still have to do the culture fit. You still have to make sure it's that right person. But man, when I actually find those two that I interviewed, they probably told me things that I didn't want to hear, in terms of, do you realize you have this bottleneck? Do you realize maybe this thing you're totally proud of still needs a lot of improvement? And so when we are more, I guess, thoughtful, especially those roles that we haven't hired for before, when we're more thoughtful about it and maybe less biased in terms of that likability, it's been incredibly successful. And I would say those those two have been hired at different times. One is kind of 3 years ahead of the other one. And I mean, uh, COVID was an incredibly stressful time. It was also a gift to this business in terms of it's built incredible awareness in the industry about indoor air quality. And BGE was very successful as a Western Canadian company trying to source, you know, MERV 13 products from all over the planet and having some of the better lead times than some of our billion-dollar competitors.
In my outro, I'm actually going to give a summary of so many of the steps that you just mentioned, Roberta, because you talked about even sometimes we don't know we need a position. So that org redesign and that kind of thinking comes into this as well. So pre-planning and then systems, having a systematic way of doing this. And then, like you said, you could tell that they might already fit the culture on some level because they're already telling you stuff you don't want to hear in a way that's not offensive, in a way that's helping the company in different ways. So yeah, I'm gonna do that in the outro because I see it as super, super valuable, and I want to be respectful of your time here. So we started off talking a little bit about BG, and I said, hey, what were conversations around the kitchen table like? I'd like to kind of sit there at the end. What are conversations now around the kitchen table? I know your kids are kind of on the way out of the home right now with their age, but what have conversations been like lately sitting around the table?
Well, first of all, I saw a meme the other day, and it's a dad with a coffee cup, and he says, "I'm so proud of my daughter. She already knows everything she needs to know." And so I would say I often like filter what I'm about to say because I know they're going to say, "Mom, I got it." Um, I would say, especially at the beginning of COVID, our kids, came to us and they saw their parents had more games nights and maybe were home more often, and there was a little bit more, I guess, my kids saw their parents as there was a little bit more family time at that time. Unfortunately for our kids, we said, guys, we need to make sure we have a business after this. And so mom and dad are going to be pretty busy. We're going to be pretty stressed, and we're going to need, because you guys don't have soccer and you don't have singing and you don't have friends, you can't go see your friends. We're going to ask you to take on some responsibilities in the household that normally we wouldn't ask you to do. So they're incredible chefs. We signed up for HelloFresh, shout out to them, and it taught them how to cook. And so every night we did have a good meal and we could talk about the day. They came into the business when I needed some extra work to be done, and there was no one here for that. And so we would be having conversations about like, well, why are we doing this, and why can't someone else do this, or what is important about this? And so we would just talk about like, these are just things sometimes you have to roll up your sleeves and do those things. So I think they get more of like a backstage pass to what happens when you're running a business. I wish I was actually talking to my friend about it yesterday. I wish maybe I did this with more better storytelling and charisma and grace, like my father, that I think my father did, because my kids said, "Mom, no way, no how are we going to follow you in the business. Entrepreneurship is hard." So maybe I've made it look less exciting, but they understand the responsibility that we have. They also understand the flexibility that it provides. And they understand that there's not like a linear path to things. So if you kind of think, well, I just go to Indeed and I just apply there to get all the jobs, they do think very creatively about the different ways that they're going to do things. And they also think about like, maybe at the end of the day, that job isn't a paying job, but the experience I'm going to gain from that volunteer or that project or those sorts of things are going to serve me well. And we were just talking before we went online here, just talking about, hey, they're also understanding about the economy. I heard one of my daughters talking to her friends about all the candidates and what they were going to do and what the opinions were and why they would choose this one if they believe, for these reasons, and they choose this one for those reasons, and how do they choose the best one. And so just hearing them think very, I think sometimes they're kind of going, "Mom, I get it. I got it. Like, you don't need to tell me this." But they do got it, and maybe they have been hearing us talk about it, or maybe, just from the exposure that they've had from the sorts of conversations that my husband and I have around the table. I would say the thing I've changed is that the business does not dominate the conversation. Say Ian and I talk a lot about it a lot, but when our kids come into the room, we make sure we pause, ask them how their day is, those sorts of things, and then we might move into that. But it's not the only thing we talk about at the table. So I am mindful about that, because that was a little bit different when I was a kid.
Yeah, you mentioned the Venn diagram a little earlier on, talking about how there are these different circles, and they have validity on their own in different ways. Something that comes across is that it sounds like your dad was really intentional about teaching you guys principles of life and business and kind of bigger ideas, and that you have also been really intentional about teaching these larger principles. It's funny. I don't know how many parents are like this. But my kids are 16 and 14 right now. And I push them hard on, hey, learn about life. Because if you learn about life, the details you'll be able to figure out along the way. So learn these bigger concepts. And I'm sometimes concerned, like, hey, are they doing okay here, doing there? And then sometimes I come across, we're in a community, or other adults meet them, and they're like, wow, your kids can communicate about anything. And I think that they come across better generally in public because we're really working on these things. And I can sometimes go, okay, they do have this. Like, when can I step back a little bit and give them a little bit less pressure, because they are working at this and they are getting it. They're not perfect, and I'm not perfect, but they're getting this stuff, which is really exciting. Roberta, thank you so much for this. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your energy, everything that you're giving us here.
Well, I appreciate this. I think, from talking to you earlier, as we were prepping for this, and I think about the journey that I've been on. It's a different perspective now, as I'm a few more years away from that, and tons of gratitude. And I would just say, like, finally, with the conversations I had with my kids, my dad was having conversations with a 3-year-old Reese and a 5-year-old Ella about the business. So I think my village of my dad and my mom, and just Ian's parents were also entrepreneurs. So we've had a village of people that speak to them. And I agree with you. It's when you hear from someone outside, like out in the community, that says, I saw your kids, and hey, they sat and talked to me and didn't look at their phone once, or they actually were talking about such and such that's happening in the world and their perspective on it. And I do believe, I think we always, like, poo-poo technology, and our kids are in their phone so much, but the access they have to information, things that I just learned 5 years ago in terms of different social or psychological things, they already have those tools. So I think we're in good hands with whatever our children decide to do. I think we're in good hands.
Something I'm really enjoying about doing all these interviews is having different perspectives on sometimes a similar topic. So we've talked about succession planning before. Go back and listen to the other episodes we have on succession planning. Maybe we'll create show notes for those. But it's fascinating to hear different perspectives on this, because when I hear different perspectives, I just gain more fullness of understanding. It's funny. There's an old quote that I hear all the time, and I say all the time to the people around me, and it is, if you have a simple answer before you've really struggled, then that's a little bit naive. However, if you come up with a simple answer after you've struggled with a problem and the complexities of a problem, now you've got wisdom. And I think about that all the time. I think it was originally a Mark Twain quote. Anyway, the things that I want to really handle here in the outro are, one, Roberta had a varied background. So she went out on her own and figured out consulting and tech, then built various parts of the family business herself with HR and strategic planning. And this was done honestly. What I mean by that is that it was not done in a way where everyone was giving her a chance, or she was going, how do I use this for the future? She was honestly focused, very focused on those activities and those skill sets. And I think back to an episode I did with Carmen, and how he emphasize this T-shaped leadership or T-designed leaders because it's so important to have that broad background as well as digging deep into specialties. One thing that I picked up on here was how important it was to plan a succession early. I don't know what Roberta's dad, what he was thinking because I haven't spoken with him, but he was obviously intentional about so much of this. And that was so important. This intentionality came out in so many ways. I think that, I mean, they involved the entire family. I'm sure they paid a lot of money for different third-party organizations to really get a good perspective on this rather than only what they were thinking. Again, I've heard when you hire a consultant, you're getting the perspective of many businesses because that person has been involved in so many other businesses. So you're leveraging that experience. The family was also intentional even when not specifically working toward the way it looked in the end. So again, Roberta was honestly working in the business, not simply taking it over. And she talked about how a succession plan probably was starting in junior high on some level. The other thing that I found fascinating with this interview was how Roberta and her team are succession planning for the entire leadership team. She talked about how the leadership team with her father was just so phenomenal and challenging each other and getting the best out of each other, and how she has worked hard to replace certain people with others who can battle for the business, battle for the company. Roberta touched on the fact that having people who have gone through business cycles and economic cycles is so valuable in this when she was building the leadership team. And I didn't pull on the thread a lot this time, but I wanted to emphasize it here a little bit that I guess this is coming back to T-shaped leaders, but the focus on finding people with experience is fantastic as well. I mean, young people, fantastic, but having people with experience, there's value to that. Again, hired a ton of experts as needed instead of just trying to get by on their own wisdom and their own knowledge or their own experiences. And then I'd promised to go over kind of the hiring leader tips that Roberta mentioned. And I went through, there were kind of a couple sections she spoke on with this. And here's the order I came up with. Four ideas, 4 tips. One was how important she emphasized getting the role right is. So that came to org planning and creating new roles as needed for the business that will support the business as much as possible. And then with that, she also said, what is the ideal profile for that new hire? Again, getting the profile right, getting what is needed for that role was extremely important for them because they got it wrong a couple of times because they liked the person or because they came across well in an interview or through the process. And then maybe the second part of that is to interview, manage, and promote largely on values, not to the detriment of hiring the right person. Of course, finding the right person was incredibly important. She talked about Mike helping out with that, Mike Moreau at Concord helping out with that a lot, but also making sure that values piece was there, that there was a thread of that throughout everything that they do. Again, interviewing, managing, and promoting. Thirdly, the third tip was finding people who tell you what you don't want to hear. Those who are finding holes and weaknesses in business are more valuable than people who are simply supporting whatever you decide. Having those strong opinions, those people who will push back so that the business does well. And then lastly, number 4 was, and this is just kind of a side tip that she mentioned, but she said the needs of one person cannot be placed above the organization. The needs of one person cannot be placed above the organization. And again, the reason for that is that the organization is the goal of having a strong organization, and any one individual, I think we've talked about this before a number of times, having any one person's needs placed above the organization will eventually hurt the organization, which will eventually hurt all the people in the organization as well. It's a loop that works. The focus needs to be on the organization, and sometimes that's where tough decisions are made. That's where we do things that might be difficult in the moment, but long-term serve everyone. The thing that I think about all the time with this is what unions did to Detroit and how in the car industry there, and how placing maybe the needs of employees or the desires of employees above everything else completely wiped out an industry in a city, basically bankrupted a city. And how sad that is, because it's not that I think any one individual necessarily was evil in that. There might have been, but that the organization needs to have emphasis on it rather than on any individual. Thank you for listening. I appreciate the listeners and how we're growing our listenership. Feel free to give us a like or give us some feedback. I know that sometimes people send an email to Mike and give feedback that way. Feel free to give feedback right on the platform that you're using, whether that is Spotify, whether that is Apple, however you are getting your podcasts here. And enjoy your week. Grow, learn, create a better performing organization for yourself and for the people around you, and enjoy the process.